Babylon, USA, Christian Documentary Review. That's a mouthful. So there's a really good, I recommend it, documentary called Babylon, USA. And it's put out by Stephen L. Anderson in Arizona. And so some of it's got some of the biggest name Christians that are, kind of anti-Babylon Christians, like Chuck Baldwin, Kent Hovind, Texe Marrs, G.E. Griffin. I assume Griffin is a Christian. I'm not positive of that. But what's great about it is that by definition, those who believe in the words of our Creator King should be antithetical. They should despise, they should hate evil. And what we've witnessed over the last 20 years is just this blooming evil everywhere. The United States has turned into Sodom and Gomorrah. And you don't hear much of any pushback by Christians on TV, because they don't, they're not really on TV. And if they're on TV, they're, Zionists, and they're just cheerleading for the synagogue of Satan to go invade more countries. So they're basically loyal opposition to Babylon. And it's not even, it's so overt and obvious. You have Jesus, who's the Prince of Peace. Meanwhile, these guys want to invade and destroy every country that surrounds Israel, starting with Syria and Iran, rolling back to Libya, rolling back to Iraq, and they have no understanding whatsoever of, the Federal Reserve and how the money lenders control everything through the Federal Reserve. And sadly, most of the Christians don't listen to it. They don't care. They're so wrapped up into idolatry and flag waving that they are just totally blind to the concept that the United States even has an empire, right? So this documentary had Chuck Baldwin, Stephen L. Anderson, Kent Hovind, Texe Marrs, G.E. Griffin, Joyce Riley, and there's other people as well, but right off the top of my head. So there's some of the bigger names that are kind of non-Zionist Christians, where they're generally supporting peace rather than perpetual war. Jane Ford, hello. Alex Smith, thanks for checking in. And I don't know if any of you guys had a chance to watch this documentary. It's free on YouTube. It's on my wall on Facebook. It's called Babylon, USA. And so I want to give some of the good aspects about it. And what's really important, this is really, really important, is that, I've been a truther now for 10 years, right? So I woke up during the bank bailout. I didn't know nothing about all of this, deep state, false flags, and how the money lenders rule and finance both sides of war. I didn't know none of that stuff until after the bank bailout, and I investigated the Federal Reserve and confiscating gold and silver and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, the point is when you wake up, there's all of these documentaries that kind of help you on your way. And they also sheep herd you into non-solutions. So you wake up, and so for instance, there was Freedom to Fascism, put out by, I can't remember the dude's name. In any case, it's just explaining how there's going to be this war on terror, and it's just going to go on and on and on, and the United States is going to be the policeman of the world, and they're going to be running around looking. Aaron Russo, that's who the producer was. So all of these documentaries, they come from a very secular standpoint. So they're using the Constitution as their basis for truth. They're using the Constitution as their cornerstone. In their mind, the Constitution is the Bible, but they are two different things. There's no voting in the Bible. There's no need for majorities in the Bible. We, the people, make the laws in the Constitution. Under the Bible, man cannot create law, and only Yah creates law. So the point being is, at least here's a documentary. I must have watched, I don't even know how many documentaries I've watched. Probably like 500. You know what I mean? Because I'm just so curious. And Yah has called me and anointed me in order to fix the money system. And fixing the money system is the key. It's the Achilles heel to the whole mess. Monetary reform. Monetary and land reform are the keys to fixing the whole mess non-violently, quickly, rapidly. Like it's just a slam dunk as soon as the people would wake up, but they're not even willing to investigate new things, so you can't get them focused. Like it's one thing to study a topic, because that takes time and energy, but you have to have them be interested before you can bring them to a solution, and they're not even willing to admit there's a problem. So at least finally, Christians in this documentary are recognizing that there is a problem. They're admitting that the United States is an empire. They're admitting that the United States was founded on Freemasonic principles as its cornerstone, as opposed to the Bible as its cornerstone, or Jesus Christ as the cornerstone Messiah. So they're finally, Christians are finally, with this documentary, they have a pushback. So Rick Davis, if you get a chance, I'm doing a review on a documentary. I'm going to play a little bit of it. Stephen L. Anderson, I don't agree with everything that he talks about. So I'm going to give some of the good stuff about this documentary, and it's like, finally, Christians, there's some pushback. And what I mean by that is you wake up in 08 like myself, and you're seeing all these different documentaries, and they talk about the Federal Reserve, right? Oh, the Federal Reserve is the root of evil. So we're having these false flags. Alex Jones is, given these or loose chains, and 9/11. So you learn about false flags, and then they say, the reason why we're having false flags is because of these money. The Federal Reserve has been corrupted, and the corruption started in 1913. So thankfully, these Christians, they're going back further than that, and they're explaining how, for instance, George Washington and Benjamin Franklin were both Freemasons. So again, Chuck Baldwin, Stephen Anderson, Kent Hovind, Texe Marrs, G.E. Griffin, and I used to hand out, CDs in traffic. Robin and I both did this about the Federal Reserve, and G.E. Griffin given a speech about, how the Federal Reserve was created and how it's a private company and all that kind of jazz. So finally, there's a Christian documentary in the form of Babylon USA explaining how it, just didn't all just start in 1913. And this should be a Christian issue, and they're using the Bible generally as its basis for truth, as opposed to the U.S. Constitution as the basis for truth. So here's a little bit of the documentary.
Babylon is that head of gold. The image of gold. Daniel told him, King Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. I mean, we know the Bible tells us that was the first kingdom, the Babylonian kingdom.
So we know that the head of gold represents King Nebuchadnezzar and represents the Babylonian Empire, because these represent the kings, but they also represent the kingdoms. In verse number 39, he says this, and after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee. Now we know that other kingdom that came after Nebuchadnezzar was the Medo-Persian Empire. All throughout the book of Daniel, we're told about the Medes and the Persians, and we know that they were the ones that came into power after the nation of Babylon. And it's interesting because in the image there,
So
the Medo-Persian
anyway,
Empire is
they
represented by
they do a good job because it's well produced, you know, as opposed to what I'm doing where it's not edited, it's just me, and it's just winging it, you know. This documentary, I'm going to give all the good aspects of it and not, you know, I don't want to be a jerk because there's some stuff that I think it's very important that finally Christians, believers, those who profess to believe the words of our King are finally pushing back. You know, again, the point is that all these years, there's never been, that I've seen, a documentary put out by Christians about 9/11 and false flags and that. So you'll have guys that say they're Christians, like Alex Jones or whatever, right? But they won't go all the way. So they're just skimming over the surface. And then because they're only skimming over the surface, they're able to get people deceived with moral relativism. You know, like Alex Jones, like, you know, now he's totally pushing Trump, and he's Judas goat, that he's herding all of those followers into a ditch with no solution. So, okay, so the good aspects of the documentary is, one, it establishes firmly that the United States is an empire. And that's very important because, number one, an empire oppresses foreign nations, right, which is evil. But by definition, the way the empire is exporting its own oppression. So there's oppression within the empire, the host nation, meaning Rome or Egypt or whatever empire you want to use, Babylon, right? That in the United States, there's like this common thought that, oh, we're just being oppressive to these other countries, but the people in the United States, they're all free. No, it's slavery in the United States, and the U.S. is exporting that slavery to other nations. So these guys are all consistent with that. Number three, it's well produced. You know, like Chuck Baldwin is all the way up in Kalispell, Montana, and there's snow there. And then they'll go down, and at one point they're talking about the merchants of the earth. So they'll be all the way down in Long Beach, California. Basically, you know, in Revelation, it talks about the merchants of the earth crying when Babylon falls. So they're showing all this merchandise being shipped in and out of the United States because they're making the case that the United States is Babylon, which I disagree with, and I'll get to that in a minute. Number four, the documentary firmly establishes how the United States was always founded on Freemasonic principles, and the evidence that it gives for that. The evidence that it gives for that is, George Washington was a Freemason, for instance, that the architecture, like the way the streets were laid out in Washington, D.C. is in the shape of a pentagram. And the Great Seal, and they give a little history of the Illuminati and basically, you know, how basically they co-opted the American Revolution when it was done by Christians willing to die and bleed on behalf of freedom for themselves and their children. And then they hijacked with that with humanism and we the peopleism and that sort of thing. Number five, it shows how the Liberty Bell, not the Liberty Bell, but the Statue of Liberty is modeled after a man. So that, like, I always looked at, like, man, that statue, it kind of looks awfully masculine. And I always thought that, but I never really, you know, I never really thought a real big deal about the Statue of Liberty, so I didn't really care much. But they made the case, well, that the Statue of Liberty is actually like some kind of Greek god, transgender, cross-dressing god. And now that you see that we're living in Sodom and Gomorrah, it totally makes sense. So I think it's, when they talk about women's liberation and the Statue of Liberty and libertarian, you'll see that all of those, that's a false god of liberty. So all of those things are really good, and I can't emphasize, I recommend that you watch it, because there's some good stuff in there that I didn't know myself, and I'm pretty well studied. And I'm a sponge for it. I'm always curious, and I always think I can glean. And I don't agree with any of these guys totally. And I'm going to explain why in a second. Because at the end of it, and this is so they're making the case that the United States is Babylon, and therefore, since it's Babylon, and the Bible in Revelation explains how the empire of Babylon is going to be destroyed, and how it's going to be like fiery and like fire and brimstone and all that kind of stuff. Stephen L. Anderson gets off on that kind of thing, that the United States is going to be destroyed. And so that's their conclusion. A, the United States is Babylon. B, because it's an empire, which it is. I agree with all this stuff, that Babylon is an empire, that the United States is going to be destroyed and completely, and actually they go on to the point that no one will ever inhabit it again. So that means a significant portion of the North American landmass will be uninhabited, according to what they're describing. Okay, so that is a general. So I hope that I'm not what's that word? Straw manning. I don't think that I am. By the basis of the title of the movie, they're saying Babylon, USA. They're saying the United States is Babylon. And if you look around, they make a very good case for that this is Sodom and Gomorrah. Like, they can make a very, very, very good case. But just like Andrew Gibson says here in the comments, he says, modern Babylon is confusion. It's a worldwide headquarters, America, London, Rome, Israel. And that's where I go with it. It's, if you ever hear of the concept of the empire of the city, there's three alleged, so-called Christian capitals. You have Washington, D.C., that has an Egyptian obelisk in it. You also have the city of London with an Egyptian obelisk. And you have the Vatican with an Egyptian obelisk. Each one of those is a separate country with its own small military, and it's got its own laws, and it's got its own flag, and it's that kind of thing. Like the Vatican has its own little Vatican Guard or whatever they are. So the point being is that within this, I'm showing, I agree with Andrew Gibson, is that Babylon has been the same. It's been the same empire overall. It's been the moneylenders for thousands of years. And the Bible, we're using the word of God as our basis for truth. And that's why this is so important. That's why this documentary is so important, is that I can go to those pastors. I say, brother, I understand you're a believer in the word of this book. I am too. Let's have a conversation, because I really think if we start putting our heads together and you're open to some new information, like we're all learning, we're all coming out of Babylonian confusion, we're all trying to figure it out. I love you. You have kids, right? Well, do we want our kids to be incinerated in the future that you're describing? I know I don't want to, and I'm coming with you, brother, sister, with some good news. Your documentary, when you're all done, you're kind of depressed because there's no good news. You know why there's no good news? There's no anointing. There's no Rick Davis anointing of the cannabis of Exodus, and that's what it has to be understood, that the basis of most of this book is based upon the burning bush direct revelation between Moses and Yahweh. Yahweh, right? And the Bible repeatedly uses the word Lord. Well, Lord is vague. Lord could be Baal, but Yah is Yah. Yah is the creator God of the Bible. and his son, Messiah, Jesus Christ, Yah who saves, Yahushua, right? He died so that the debt was paid, right? So we're immersed in an international system. It's supernatural, national, not super, well, it's supernatural. It's supernatural too. It's also supernational, meaning it's above the countries. The United States has to borrow money from the international moneylenders, and the borrower, we the people, are servants to the moneylenders. The United States is just a corporate front, just like we've all been turned into corporations. So we're all subsidiary corporations. Well, the big corporation that we need to be concerned with is the one that monopolize all the world's commodities, the great merchants of all the world, not just the West. You know, this isn't a new thing that just started a couple hundred years ago. This is thousands of years old. And it's, the Bible uses language talking about that, you know, the empire was and was not and was again. So what they're saying is that it appears to die, like Great Britain when it was the empire where the sun never, like it appears to die, but then it comes back. Meaning it appears that the United States won its independence from Great Britain, but it didn't. Or it appears that, you know, the Vatican lost its control, but it didn't, right? So it keeps coming back. And the reason that it comes back is that it's our responsibility. It's our responsibility to become biblical judges of tens, fifties, hundreds, and thousands. And that's the biblical government. And because sadly these guys are unaware of that, but it's easy to look up. It's in Deuteronomy and Exodus. The biblical government is what we are supposed to operate on. After Messiah was crucified on the cross, they were still having Yah select a replacement for Judas, who sold his soul for 30 pieces of silver. And that's the whole thing, is we have to realize that capitalism is just a front for usury. And all of these guys, Baldwin, Anderson, Hovind, Marrs, Griffin, etc., they're capitalists. And I've heard presentations that I've used in the past by Anderson, where he exposes that usury is evil. But in the meantime, he's kind of double-minded because he's a capitalist, or I don't see him condemn capitalism enough. Yah is neither a capitalist or a socialist or a fascist, right? We're supposed to be living tribally, right? Got my tribal seeds shirt on, tribal seeds. And the tribal seeds aspect here's the good news. The good news is what Jesus was doing when he was repeating a verse from the Old Testament. It says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." This is from Luke 4:18 and 19. He was reading from the scroll of Isaiah 61 from the Old Testament. The whole book, the whole thing is the good news. The good news that you don't have to be a slave. The good news is that we don't have to be making bricks for Pharaoh all the time. The good news is that what has been done will be done. There's nothing under the sun. So you brothers and sisters, Baldwin, Anderson, Hovind, Marrs, and Griffin, if any of you are listening to us, surely you know in this book somewhere about there was this other empire where all of the people were turned into bond servants, right? Bondmen and women, they're turned into debt slaves, just like we are, where they had lost their identity, they forgot their history, they forgot who they were, and they came to a point they didn't realize they're Israelites. Well, that's us. We're the Israelites. We've been brainwashed for so long, we forgot that we're Israelites. And we're tribal. We're meant to be living on the land tribally with our, to be self-sufficient on the land, not members of an international globalist system where, you know, all of our stuff is made from China, and you know, the money lenders are able to manipulate currencies and make sure that, you know, the slaves in China are starving and dying, and the United States is kind of like the fake city on a hill to say, hey, look, it could be as good as the United States, and that propaganda is melting away, and people are just, as revelation is occurring, people are seeing that the fangs of Babylon are being revealed, right? So that's what's going on, and this is part of that journey. This is the initial part of a Christian revival. And the Christian revival is for 144,000 of us in an Exodus generation to realize, hey, if we don't take responsibility to self-govern, that means we will be ruled and we will be governed by other people. In the same manner, if I don't govern myself and I turn into an alcoholic, drunk, whatever, I will self-destruct and I will be governed and I'll go to jail and I'll get DUIs and all that nonsense. I've done all that, and it's boring, and it's a waste. It's a type of suicide. But when we are born again anew under our King anoints us to accomplish his will, so his will can be done. All right, his will is exactly what he was repeating from the scroll of Isaiah 61, which is a reference to the year of our Lord's favor. And it's a year of the release of captives. Well, the year of the release of the captives is Exodus, right? And Exodus was a jubilee. Jubilee is directly connected to going on to the land of your fathers. The Liberty Bell has a law on it for from Leviticus 25:10, I think it's correct. Proclaim liberty throughout the land, and to all in the inhabitants it shall be a jubilee to you. That means you all freed. We're freed from the captivity. And when we are freed from this captivity, where we just go, oh, we can imagine if we all just bartered, right? Babylon would come, Wall Street would collapse. Babylon, the great merchants of the earth would collapse. The International Monetary Fund would collapse. The World Bank would collapse. The Federal Reserve would collapse. With the Jubilee, every single corporation on earth and every government on earth loses its title to all land, and all of the land is repatriated back to the people, because it's all Yah's. And if you ever have a chance, read the parable of the wicked tenant. The parable of the wicked tenant, it's in several of the New Testament Gospels. And it basically, in a quick synopsis, the scribes and the Pharisees who are making laws up, they were in captivity, because Yah promises if you obey me and you obey my law, you won't go into captivity. We have to remember that. If we obey Yah, then we become Yah's bride, then Yah protects us. And then we got nothing to worry about. So the good news, because it threatens all of these governments and international corporations, they are completely destroyed, because our King wants to give all of us a free land inheritance so that we can be just like the wild animals and even the domesticated animals. They're not paying. It's we human beings which are unique to this mindset that we have to pay Pharaoh and Caesar and Uncle Sam and Rothschild to pay to live on the land. We have been deceived. And none of these guys talk about that. In fact, there's virtually nobody on the internet that talks about that. I should say very, very, very few that understand biblical economics, and particularly on biblical economics. They might find some, pagans or primitivists or like American Indians that might talk about it. I'm talking about it from a biblical standpoint. Is Yah wants to give all of us a free land inheritance. That's part of the promise, right? That the sons the seed of Abraham will be a blessing to all the nations. Well, that's how all of these prophecies are fulfilled. And part of that prophecy is the awareness that this even happens. And Yah says specifically, I'm going to turn Israel's heart of stone to a heart of flesh, and then I'm going to write my law on her heart. I'm going to write my law on her heart so that she obeys me out of love. If you love me, keep my commandments. So that Israel can finally see, oh my God, if I render and serve and tithe to Caesar, that means I'm worshiping Caesar. If I fear the IRS, that means I am going to be obedient to the IRS, which means I'm going to obey the IRS, which means I'm worshiping and I'm believing. I believe in Caesar, and I believe that Caesar can create law. When the Bible is very plain in Isaiah 22 and 33 and James 4:12, that only the Lord is lawgiver, right? So these are the things that I would say to challenge. You know what? Obviously, I can't get an audience with them though. So I don't know, if they're willing. If they're willing, and you want to have a good disposition, say, oh, they're just ignorant to what I'm describing. They're just ignorant to it. But then when you bring it up to them, like Pastor Chuck Baldwin, I got kicked off of his wall, right? And he's like, I've done this a little because G.E. Griffin, he's more in my arena because he gets more deeply into monetary reform than these other guys, because G.E. Griffin wrote the book Creature from Jekyll Island, which I have a copy of it here. I used to promote it. But now, once, that's when I was a constitutionalist. But now, once I see how usury, if you talk to most of these guys in terms of the monetary system, they would say, well, you have a paper money system, and therefore it's evil because it's a paper money system. If we had gold and silver, it'd be all good. And then I say to them, well, Jesus whipped money lenders who were in a free market. Like, they were promoting a free market, and you guys are all free marketers. What's up with that? Let's talk about that. And by the way, the tables that he turned over were, they had silver shekels on them, right? What's up with that? Well, obviously it must be something bigger than just silver, whether it's paper money or not. And then I would say, well, how would a nation like Hawaii ever become independent when they don't have gold and silver? That doesn't even make any sense. Or like Florida, in Florida, I'm in Florida, there's no gold and silver. As far as that goes, when I was in Breckenridge, Colorado, which was established on gold and silver mining, there's no gold and silver around. The elite might have it, but the common people don't. So, all right, so the couple points that I would give criticism is, number one, they had no good news. That Babylon is an international system. It's not any one. It's not any one nation like the United States. These guys are generally still constitutionalists, so they still believe that man can create law, which is nonsense. And they have no solution. There's no solution. And sadly, when you have no solution, that means there's no Holy Spirit. Because, Yah knows how to fix this, right? If Moses was here today, would Moses know what to do? I would say yes. Why would Moses know what to do? Because because Yah speaks to him directly. And Yah would tell him, like, Moses, you have kids. Like, you don't want your kids to be slaves, and you are my children. I don't want you to be slaves, and I just want you to cry out to me for salvation. I want you to cry out me for protection. Don't cry out to the U.S. military. Don't cry out to the police. Don't cry out to your various religious denominations. Cry out directly to Yah, because he is the true Israelite defense force, right? And Rothschild Israel, they have a Israel defense force, but it's all based upon humanism. It's based upon voting. You always hear them talking about that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Another criticism of these guys, they didn't mention Israel at all, which, you know, there's a Star of David on the back of the one world currency. You know, maybe you guys missed that. I know some of them, like for instance, to be honest with you, Anderson has a documentary called The Road to Zion. And again, he leaves you in a ditch. He takes you into a ditch with bad news, and he doesn't have solution because he believes, you know, that the Old Testament we can ignore and the New Testament is the only thing we need to focus on. If you realize that we need to focus on both the New and the Old Testament, you'll realize that the entire Bible, this is extremely important, the setting of this book, the setting, right? So if you have a setting to some story, the setting of, there's a movie called The Princess Bride, right? Where's the setting? That was on Earth, right? What's the setting for Star Wars, right? That's a fake outer space, right? Total myth, right? You know, just think of the different On Golden Pond. I don't know why that came up, right? The setting of that is like on a lake in like, I think it's maybe in the Northeast United States. I'm not sure. So anyway, the setting of the Bible is it's on Earth, right? The Garden of Eden was on Earth. The kingdom, when Yah dwelled with his people and during the garden, that was on Earth. When Yah dwelled with his people during the Exodus story, as a column of fire by day and a pillar of smoke by night, right? When that occurred, that was on Earth. Well, these guys, Anderson, Baldwin, and such, they're almost all rapturists, so they're just giving it up. They're like, we'll be gone, right? They don't really have a skin in the game, because I realize that we have to, in the same way, to the bad guys, this struggle is on Earth. All right, so going on with the basics. This entire book is about the Israelites, the full Testament, the Old and New Testaments combined together for the full Testament. You need the Old Testament in order to understand what the good news is. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted, right? So after you're all done listening to Babylon USA, you're going to be depressed because the United States is going to be incinerated in sulfur, basically, right? Well, you've got no good news, so you're depressed. Well, what would Jesus say to you? Jesus said, hey, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me with cannabis oil. Did you hear that? I said it. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. Why? Because I was anointed like David before he beat Goliath. Right before he was anointed, and he immediately received the Spirit of Yahweh with cannabis oil. That's a fact. That's a provable, two-witness fact. And thank you, Rick Davis, for being part of that proof, right? It's a provable, scripturally provable two-witness fact that Saul immediately received the Spirit of the Lord, Yahweh, after he was anointed with cannabis oil. Cannabis of Exodus 30 has the ingredients, 30:23. So this is a big deal. This is how the hearts of stone are turned to hearts of flesh. Joshua Robert Castaneda says cannabism, which is accurate. That's from Strong's number 7070. Strong's Concordance number 7070. So I'm coming to you with the good news. Because the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me with cannabis oil to preach good news to the poor. What's that good news? Well, it's the release of captives. It's the recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the year of our Lord's favor. I'm not making it up. It's right from Luke 4:18 and 19. And what is the year? What is the year of our Lord's favor? The year that his children are released from slavery. When does that happen? Jubilee, as part of a regular built-in revolution. Every 7 years, you have debt forgiveness. Every 50 years, you repatriate the land. And if you haven't done that recently, you have an exodus. What's exodus? A nonviolent removal of consent where we completely reject the ways of man's law and we completely surrender. We divorce Pharaoh, we divorce Caesar, we divorce Uncle Sam and Rothschild, and we say, no, 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 we are only going to serve Yah, the creator of the Bible, and his son, Jesus Christ. We serve him, and the way we demonstrate that we worship and serve is not by what our words are, it's how we live our lives according, especially and particularly, to the economic laws of the Bible, because the economic laws of the Bible destroy the merchants of the earth, because usury is abolished, because money monopoly is abolished, because we don't have to pay to live except a 10% tithe, which we can tithe, not even with money. We don't even need money to tithe. Again, this is a tribal seeds. I'm planting tribal seeds. Entire families live tribally together, the whole, like the American Indians or the Amish. This is the vision for victory. This is how we win. So I know like the whole cannabis thing for some of you is just going to trip you out, but look up Strong's number 7070, and it's the reason why cannabis is so offensive to particularly Uncle Sam. Why does Uncle Sam hate? Why does Babylon hate cannabis? Why? Is it because Babylon's trying to protect us from something harmful? No. Cannabis has never killed anybody. You might think you're gonna die, but you don't die. You might giggle. You might freak out because you're paranoid, but you don't die. So the point is, it's not for our protection. It's for our enslavement that cannabis is made contraband. It's for our enslavement because Babylon uses alcohol and pharmakia and all sorts of other man-made chemicals in order to get us wrapped up into our fleshly desires. And that's how Babylon does it. Babylon creates an amusement park, prison. United States basically is an amusement park prison where all of our lusts, all of our earthly urges and lusts and passions are titillated so that we are always trying to pursue food or sex or sloth or vanity or the 7 deadly sins effectively. And by knowing how to subvert, and especially for men, sex, it's how they are able to enslave our minds to get us, because that's just all forms of idolatry. Any addiction is a form of idolatry. And that's what we have to do, is recognize that we are under a spell of capitalism and usury. So much so that this parasite, these usurers, these international moneylenders, which are now the head. Deuteronomy 28:43 is very specific, says that the head will be the moneylenders. It says the alien among you, it's Deuteronomy 28:43, the alien among you will rise higher and higher. You will go down lower and lower. He will lend money to you. You will not lend money to him. He will become the head and you will become the tail. I've never heard G.E. Griffin talk about that. He talks about the Federal Reserve all the time and the bankers' control and stuff. He wrote a book about it, but I've never heard him talk about the moneylenders being the head, not just because they passed the Federal Reserve Act, but if we rebel from Yah's law, that means things that are completely disconnected from the money system. So if we the people make any law, then we fall into captivity. Then we receive the curse of the moneylenders instead of the blessings. From Deuteronomy 28 offers the blessings if we obey, that will be the head and that we will lend to many nations. So it's extremely important to use the Bible as your basis for truth, because then you'll see, once you know the truth, then you can see the deceptions which still remain sadly within the documentary Babylon USA. Here's the straight truth. Man cannot create law. Adam, Eve, and the serpent could not have a majority vote and say, no, we're not going to die if we partake from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. No matter, even if they had, some more people, even if the vote was even more overwhelming, even if there was 1,000 of them in the garden, and they said that they could eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that they surely wouldn't die, it still wouldn't matter. Yah's not looking for our permission and our suggestions. We are the pot, he is the potter, and that's what's up. So just to review, I'll tie this up. Babylon USA documentary features Pastor Chuck Baldwin, Pastor Stephen L. Anderson, Kent Hovind. I don't think he's a pastor, but he could be. Texe Marrs, who has got a radio show, and G.E. Griffin of The Creature from Jekyll Island, and Joyce Riley from The Power Hour. So it's got a lot of big names in the truth movement that are Christians. And finally, there's a documentary by Christians for Christians exposing some end times prophecies and basically explaining these various empires and what's good. They identify the United States as having an empire, which is outstanding, and how it was, from its foundation, it was a Freemasonic creation. The documentary is well produced, and that the Statue of Liberty is actually a man. That's really good stuff. But its fatal flaw is, sadly, they're constitutionalists, and they still believe that man can create law, and that they don't have any good news, right? If they're Christians, they should be coming with good news, and they don't. They're saying, their good news is like, oh, you die, and after you're dead or after the rapture, you'll be okay. No, the setting of this Bible is about, let's say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. His name is hallowed because he has an earthly kingdom, because he wants good news on earth, not just in heaven after, the afterlife or some future rapture. It's about his will being done on earth, his kingdom on earth. The setting to the Bible is on earth. Yah wants to dwell with his people on earth. And that's what we want. The Lord's Prayer, again, which includes debt forgiveness. Jubilee includes debt forgiveness. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Forgive the debts. Why is it so important for debt forgiveness to be in the Lord's Prayer? Because if you forgive the debts, there's no debt, and you no longer have any borrowers who are servants to the moneylenders. And if there's no borrowers who are servants to the moneylenders, then they're bond servants to Yahweh instead of bond servants to Rothschild and Uncle Sam. Then they are free. Then the merchants of the earth will cry, 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 cry. So the good news is Jubilee, and Yah owns all of it. And we have to realize that we've become like wicked tenants, thinking that we create the law, and we do not create the law. Yah creates the law, and his law is the good news of Jubilee from Leviticus 25:10. Proclaim liberty throughout the land and unto all of its inhabitants. It's written on the Liberty Bell. And that's the good news we need to share everywhere. So the solution to the Babylonian captivity is to realize that it's an international system and nobody has to die. And the way that you burn it down is the altar of incense. The altar of incense. That's how you burn it down. It's not fire and brimstone where everybody dies. That's the good news. Thanks for listening.